Actually keep up the PowerPoint is giving me trouble. Do you mind just keeping up
This
the
starting.
Lightning B slide for me?
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
You go to Lightning B.
Should I go ahead and admit everyone?
Let's do it.
All good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lightning Talk Session B, Maker Literacies, Technologies, and Design. My name's Leanne Ney, and I'm the moderator for this session. So we have 4 presentations as part of this session. Each Lightning Talk is going to be about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a 10-minute Q&A towards the end. So as we go, feel free to use the chat box. You can add conversation there and ask questions, and then at the end, we will have time to ask questions of the presenters. So we're going to start things off. We've got 2 recorded talks, and then we have 2 live presentations. So first up, our first presentation is titled Rebooting Digital Literacy, Transforming a Palo Alto City Library Computer Lab, presented by Chris Markman. So Chris recorded his talk ahead of time, so we're going to go ahead and play it now.
Hey everyone, I'm really hoping the audio works this time. This is the 3rd time recording it. Who would have thought that pre-recorded was more difficult than a live webinar? I don't know. Anyway, hey, I'm Chris Markman. I'm the Library Services Manager over here at Palo Alto City Library. I'm going to talk to you today about a project that we started at Mitchell Park Library, which sort of orient you into our sort of local library setup. We're a system with 5 branches. And just in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley in general, there's a lot of libraries around us. So what I'm going to talk about today might not apply to you directly, but I think there's some lessons learned here that you can use for your own makerspace redesigns and just designs in general. So let's keep the momentum going. I'm going to jump in over here and tell you about a little more details to some historical context. We'll say. Does your library have a room with a special name that no one knows why it's called that? We do. It's called the Ventura Technology Learning Center. Now, no one actually calls it that, but it is the plaque on the wall. And this was something that came about in around 2010 because of various reasons. There were some delays with constructions and things, but we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in the space. It was a very successful launch. The library, the relaunch of Mitchell Park Library. The computer lab on the 2nd floor, though, the thing I'm going to talk about today, that was kind of underutilized for many years. And, during the pandemic closures, we saw an opportunity to kind of rethink how we're using this space. That's where the list of goals came from this slide. I'm going to tell you now about the, some of the other benefits of this redesign. It was like, we also wanted to try out some new library service models, like, sort of on-demand booking of things, the sort of DIY setup with the bookings app in my Microsoft 365. If you're not familiar with that, that's kind of like a Calendarly type setup where people can sort of like self-check themselves in. This was another area where we didn't ever really had like a formal space for like e-help things. Staff were always kind of like jumping into meeting rooms that were empty or trying to find like a empty bench or couch cushion area, seating area around here. It was nice to finally have a space dedicated to that. We could jump in anytime we wanted and use just for the one-to-one meetings. And then finally, this was another area where we're really hoping to launch more volunteer opportunities. And I'm laughing at the slide because I think Volunteer Oasis kind of implies something else, but it is funny to think about, right? If you consider that. Anyway, in 30 seconds or less, here is the redesign. Here is the essence of what we did. This group of like 6 or 7 of us at the library. One of the key things here is that we wanted a space that was modular, that was easy to move things around. Everything's on wheels. We could have different setups depending on what was happening. But then it also had storage built into that space too. So it could be packed away or locked up, depending on how many people were going to be there, or was it a staff-led event or sort of a community-led event. We had all that in mind when we started. The redesign was essentially taking, 5 rows of a public computer bank where things were kind of locked down and you're kind of stuck with that classroom setup. And we kept all the tables and the chairs, but we added a bunch of grant-funded equipment that we acquired over the last 5, 6, 7 years or so. And then it finally had a home. It finally had a place where it didn't take just as much time to set up the VR gear as it did to run an hour-long program with that same gear. So the efficiency gained was more enormous. But it was also, another area where we could really highlight some of the nice things that our library offered that people maybe didn't know that we had. Okay, enough said about that. Here's what the lab looks like now. I'm just kidding. This is an AI generated image here. I think I used Reboot Room as the prompt for that one. Copyright to Dolly for this, not me. Okay, the soft launch that started in the summer of 2022. We had some early programs here, on the left side. I'm happy to say we also have a YouTube channel where we have documented a lot of stuff, almost everything that happened in that space since then. So that includes some Twitch TV streams, some AI events, some other, the Robo Dojo series that won a couple awards. There's just a lot happening in there, so I won't spend too much time here. But you can go to our YouTube channel and just search, at Reboot Room. It's there. You'll see my face a lot because I used to stream more, but I don't as much anymore. Anyway, yeah, we did the soft launch, and then as it turns out, there were some things that we didn't anticipate. So the top question was, couldn't people borrow our equipment? And at that time, they couldn't, and they still can't right now. But we're moving towards that setup. There's a lot of more interest in gaming than we anticipated initially. But then there are also some other programs that we hadn't really considered, like podcasting, videography, photography classes. And then, of course, the Vintage Media Lab itself is it was popular and it's popular now. It's still backlogged several months out, even though we've added more days to our weekly schedule. But that was sort of an early indication that we had the right idea and that we should continue with the rest of the launch and the redesign. Another surprise, maybe this is just about the time that we did our soft launch, but there were way more parents and small children who stopped by this lab than we could have ever anticipated. This was originally it still is, a sort of teen, adults, and seniors type of space for that type of programming. But I think just by the nature of having some video game gear out and a giant TV, people saw us playing games like Dreams or other ones on the PlayStation. They wanted to know what was happening in that room. That's actually where this image comes from. You'll see it as a poster later on, but because of our our limited hours and our sort of limited staffing at the time, there was a lot of downtime. There's a lot of downtime in there in a sort of dark room, so we had a QR code and a website set up so people knew what to expect. Okay, then the hard launch happened. September. This was our massive advertising push. I think we got something in the newspaper. We had something on our front page. We had social media, all these things happening at the same time. We were able to successfully use the bookings app, although we have refined that over time. Different models that you can use for that same setup there. What else we had? The Robo Dojo, the FarmBot tours, the Streamers Academy. That's one that I led at that time too. It's sort of an interesting in-person version, then an online version. Then it came up with a hybrid setup using Beanstack. That's one of our reading club apps that we have. We also added a reference collection in there, and that kind of moves towards the long-term goals that I'll talk about later. But this is a space that we're hoping to have more sort of creativity is involved in here. There we go. Here's that slide I was just telling you about. So in the meantime, since our launch in 2022, we have had a new partnership that started with San Jose State University. That's the local library school, the high school that's right nearby us. We've expanded some programs that were more popular than others. We've ended some, we've added some new ones. We're still looking towards that open lab goal, and the ability for people, sort of register and just like have free access to the room. We've not quite added equipment checkouts, but that is planned, and I think that's something that might allow us to expand this idea to other libraries also, just having duplicates of the same equipment and same training material, all those things. And then another sort of surprise is that this room has had a lot of traffic from things like after school coding clubs or high school clubs that wanted a space to meet that wasn't, it was easier to get to, or maybe just like had more hours and different times of the weekday. We're inviting those people back now. It's sort of become an ongoing thing here. Okay, finally, last slide. In case I haven't mentioned it already, this has been a major success here. We've had almost 300 programs. I did the math today. Since the soft launch in 2022, we're a little under like 1,200 attendees total that have been in the space. I think it's actually more. I have some new programs I want to share. Maybe this will give you some ideas. So having a space for local large language model research, I think that's something that libraries should consider. Taking things out of the cloud and sort of more in person or like in front of you so you can understand them. Just see that it is another type of computer. It's not some magical thing that's out there. Of course, our Vintage Media Lab being very popular. We're thinking about expanding that with sort of add-on programs like, image restoration, video restoration, other things that you can use a computer to sort of take those digital assets and then take them to the next level. We've had some success with our own streams. We want to add some volunteer streams in the future. I mentioned podcasts before. We've actually done some podcasts, not for the public, but for staff to get the word out and sort of talk about different, things we're testing out or issues that have come up. Also just like book clubs and things like that. It's been another new area that we're exploring. And I already mentioned the student clubs and the hackathons. Let me end this. I see I'm right at the time now. Please, if you have any questions or want to learn more about our setup or the research we did, my email is at the front of the slide deck. I'm also on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. Thank you for your time. I will say goodbye once I find the stop button.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. All right, we're going to keep it moving. So our next recorded presentation is titled, What Does It Look Like to Design Makerspaces with Equity in Mind? And sharing results from photo-based surveys of library makerspaces from Celeste Moreno.
Hi everybody, thanks for your interest in this session. My name is Celeste, and today I'm going to highlight some results from photo-based surveys of library makerspaces that I hope to speak to what it looks like to design library makerspaces with an orientation toward equity. First, I want to recognize that this presentation is adapted from materials that were prepared by Ashley and myself. Ashley is not here with me today, but they are the program administrator of the Idea Labs, which are a series of library makerspaces in the Denver Public Library System in Colorado. And I am a full-time creative technologist in the makerspaces at Boulder Public Library. I'm also wrapping up a PhD at CU Boulder, where I work in a research group called Creative Communities. Some quick context for the research part. This research emerges from a national NSF-funded collaborative project called Facilitating Computational Tinkering. The photo survey that I'm sharing today was conducted with our research partners at the Idea Lab Library Makerspaces and with a couple of local Clubhouse network partners, but I'm focusing on the library makerspaces for this presentation. Continuing with our setting of the stage, I also want to briefly talk about the word equity since I use it a lot in this presentation. In this context, I'm referring to the idea that one-size solutions do not fit all, especially in these community-engaged contexts where the needs and identities of community members can be really diverse. Different people and communities need different supports to grow and thrive. There is a lot to say here, but I'm keeping it short. Some big ideas related to equity that we've reflected on as a group are that equity is an ongoing practice that you work on all of the time, It's not a checklist, it's not something that you achieve at some point, it is ongoing. And also that equity is everywhere, from the designs of our environments to how we communicate. And finally, that making time to stop and reflect is critical. One method that we tried out to support educators and the DPL makerspaces in making sense of what equity means to them is a photo survey. Why did we do a photo survey? I want to start with why photos. Makerspaces are these really sensory-rich places. There's a lot to see. There are example projects and machines and people collaborating, interesting materials, and that can be really hard to describe with just words, especially if you're not familiar with makerspaces. We also thought that a photo survey could be a more accessible way to engage Idea Lab staff in research, because sometimes talking about big ideas like equity through conversation alone can feel really challenging or even vulnerable. So soliciting photos was a great anchor point that could spark conversations and reflections that are rooted in the everyday realities of staff. Also, photos are something that can be shared both internally within the Idea Labs as a reflection tool and externally to help other people see and understand Makerspace staff's equity work. This is the process that we went through. We created a list of photo survey questions. We collected photos and reflections from Idea Lab staff. The CU Boulder team organized the data and found themes. The CU Boulder team and Idea Lab staff met for a share bag, which you can see in this picture here, and we discussed and reflected on the results. And this then turned into a research paper, which I'll share more about in a bit. And it's really important to note here that this is an iterative process, not a prescriptive process. So you don't need to follow these steps or have an outside team if you'd like to try this process yourself. Here's the list of the photo prompts that we used for this survey. Some folks texted us photos, some emailed us photos, and other we visited and we interviewed them and took photos alongside them. We spent quite a bit of time really intentionally crafting these questions, and I'm happy to chat more about this later if anybody's interested to hear some of the rationale. I'm going to share just a couple examples of responses to the photo survey. So the photo you see on this slide shows the front wall of the Hadley Makerspace, and there are some plastic containers that hold several flyers advertising the Makerspace. It's one of the first things you see as you walk into the library and the Makerspace, and this photo was an example of an educator's response to the prompt, take a photo of something that welcomes a specific community to your space. So I want you to just take a second, look at this image, and ask yourself what communities might be welcomed by what you see here. The educator who took these photos noted that this welcomes the diverse communities that the library branch serves. So they have large immigrant populations in the area they serve who speak languages like Spanish and Vietnamese. And critically, they note that the flyers are labeled in the language itself rather than in English to help decenter English as the dominant language in the space and to make it clear that other languages are valued here. This photo was an example of an educator's response to the prompt, take a photo of something that makes your space more accessible to a specific community, group, or person. So take a moment to take the photo in. This photo shows a container of headphones and a poster that says, too noisy? Ask a staff member for noise dampening headphones or grab a pair from the bin. And the educator who showed this noted that this is a useful feature for neurodiverse folks who may have sensory sensitivities and a need for lower auditory stimulus, and also that it's good for just anyone who needs a quieter environment that day. There are so many interesting examples that emerged from this photo survey and from looking at these photos together as a collection. To give you a quick taste of some of the themes that emerged as we looked at these photos together, I'm going to next share some of the findings that we shared in the research paper associated with this project. We found that what these photos showed in the Idea Lab Makerspaces is that educators curated their spaces and designed their spaces so that they supported diverse interests, so that they supported diverse needs, and supported diverse community and cultural identities, and finally, so that they celebrated their communities of learners. I invite you to dig deeper into these findings, themes, and photos through the research paper that we wrote. It's open access, so it should be free to you to access, and I will provide a link to it in the resources for this talk. It's also in a unique format that makes space for more visuals than a typical research might allow, so I hope that that makes it a little bit more accessible and engaging. I want to wrap up with some reflections. A reflection that Ashley shared is that building out explicit time for reflection is important. It can be really easy to just go, go, go in a busy community space, but you have to stop and reflect from time to time. One reflection that I wanted to highlight is that there are limitations of this research method. Photos are just one point in time. Things change in these spaces so fast. And there are things like relationships or other social and community dynamics that are maybe not captured as well through just photos. And also, focusing on photos and visual data has its own accessibility limitations, as it really does prioritize sight and the ability to view images. And on the topic of interactive resources based on research that get at equity in library makerspaces, I want to briefly plug this resource. Our research team has created a zine called What Does Equity Mean to You? And this was created to help educators like library makerspace staff to make their equity work more visible, to unpack it, and to identify places where they have room to grow and expand their practices as educators. And there's also an accompanying facilitation guide to support you in engaging in this scene. Resources for everything that I've talked about and more are linked here in the slides that you'll have access to. And with that, thank you. If you have any questions or want to get in touch, you can reach me via email at celeste.moreno@colorado.edu, or you can reach out to me via the Library Makers Network.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Celeste, and thank you, Ashley, as well. Okay, so moving on to our third presentation, we have our next presentation is live, and it is with Morgan Chivers. It's titled Maker Literacies. Morgan, you can take it away. Sorry, Morgan. We'll get you sorted. Just a minute.
I think I'm unmuted, but can't share our video still. Here I am sharing.
All right, I could see your slides.
Okay, well that's more important than my face. So I'll just start going, and if you get the video worked out, then that's a bonus.
Thank you.
Hi folks, my name is Morgan Chivers. I'm the Maker Literacies librarian at UT Arlington. And the Maker Literacies is a research initiative that we've been doing for coming on 9 years now, which is, as the subtitle says, it's transferable skills based on student learning outcomes, rooted in the type of learning that happens in makerspaces. So, as we all know, like we work with really exciting stuff, and it's really common and understandable for us to focus on the coolness of those things. I'm really excited about the tenor of the conversations that we had in the keynotes and the two prior presentations in this session, that we are thinking much more holistically than being equipment, cool tech focused. But this is still a strong theme within Makerspace community. And in a lot of the users that we see coming in is like, wow, like lasers, how cool is that? Or 3D printers, God's gift to changing the world, and it can make anything you can think of. And computer numeric controls are so great. You can integrate it with more traditional technologies like embroidery. And in this specific example, you can even tinker and hack to turn a regular sewing machine into CNC embroidery with some simple robotics programming. Um, and especially in our context, a lot of us as well are in a educational environment. And students make really cool things, like this map of the autonomous regions of Spain, laser cut out and turned into a puzzle, or this five-color woodblock laser engraved t-shirt print that was done, a self-portrait using a cameo cutter to layer up. I think this is 8 different layers of paper to express a vibrant personality. Um, or typography projects and that deal with multimedia as and using 3D printing or other digital fabrication methods in other projects as not an end in of themselves, but as a way to make components that are then used in video or other multimedia work. But why do we do all this? Right? We're about the students, and the students come first, and specifically the students learning. And in the higher education context, in the university where my career is, we're focused a lot on student learning outcomes. So Maker Literacies is a way to get out of the loop of being focused on the tech or even being focused on the specific things that the students are making and really look at the student learning outcomes and how those are important to the classes that the students are taking and the ways that we can integrate the technology that we have in the Fab Lab or in our makerspaces with those SLOs. So here's some example student learning outcomes, and what I want us to recognize is that none of these are in maker intrinsic disciplines. So it is, I don't want to say the word easy. It is uh, a more direct line to go for classes where it's a studio arts class or an architecture class or an engineering class, something that is maker intrinsic, where that discipline for decades or centuries has had their students get hands-on education and even if not formally defined as experiential learning, the students are putting their theories to test and getting real world feedback and having to iterate their way through learning how to do the core competencies of that discipline. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens on the campus community within language classes, within uh, history, within the entire College of Liberal Arts, within mathematics, within education, and philosophy, nursing, biomedical. So all of these different projects or all of these different student learning outcomes that are already nested into the curriculum that the faculty are used to running can be adapted so that we are able to integrate the makerspace in a meaningful way, not in a gimmicky way, not in a let's just use a tech because it's cool way, but in a way that really anchors in those student learning outcomes and is able to advance them. And so we have developed a long and detailed list of the types of transferable skills that people are building competencies in when they engage in making. And so we tried to approach this list in a very holistic way that really describes a lot of different facets about the types of things that people are going to be learning, whether they're conscious of it or not, and as a way of naming the type of learning that is happening and providing examples through rubrics of what expert level finesse within that competency area looks like and what moderate or developing might look like to give students a path towards leveling themselves up. And so as you can see from looking through this, all of this is technology agnostic. We're not talking about learning, how to slice an STL and make G code, or how to translate pixel-based graphics into vector-based graphics. All of those things are necessary in order to actually do whatever project, but we looked at a higher level on these things to try and make it be um, that type of lifelong learning skill that then also makes it easier to think about how we can think flexibly and associate these or map these to those student learning outcomes. Um, and also, just to say, we've done a lot of writing and publishing on this, and I will share. Um, I think right after the presentation, because I don't know how to get to the chat while I'm in it. Um, I'll share the link to our publications page, and also to the in the resources sheet for this presentation is the link to where you can see the entire set of all of these. One of the things I want to stress in this presentation is a more recent adaptation we've done in the vein of like everything is iterative, that we realized that when we were having consultations with faculty to think about how we might apply some of these maker literacies to their courses, um, that it was kind of overwhelming to look through. And so we developed this idea of frameworks where we've grouped. So within the inquiry framework are these four of the maker literacies, each of which has several sub bullets. And then, foundational practice is essentially about like the actual act of making itself, or managed, which is really what we found a lot more interest in mapping and assessing these uh, in developing time management and teamwork components. And with these of the knowledge management and of really getting students to think in a meta way, right, about their own learning, not just learning the thing that they're learning for the class content, and not just also learning the stuff they need to in order to make effectively, but also learning to learn how they are learning so that they then become more empowered and are able to learn faster, better, deeper in their future endeavors. So to help facilitate adoption of this in other institutions, and this can be higher education, K-12, this could be done for workshops that are outside of formal education, if you're wanting to focus on assessing the type of learning that is happening. We have this repository of curriculum on our webpage. And so you can see there are dozens of different examples from a wide variety of different disciplines. There are maker intrinsic disciplines represented within these. It's not like we don't do those, but I just find that those oftentimes get um, less attention, and so it's nice to highlight those and to really encourage the adoption through those, because the type of engagement you get with students is really profound and encouraging. So you can filter it by what competency you might be interested to see what curriculum other people have already developed, or by discipline, or by what institution it was developed at. And if you are using this methodology in your courses, highly encourage you to submit the course information that you've done as a participating faculty, and we can highlight you and your work and essentially give you a Creative Commons open way to publish the curriculum that you've done and help accelerate and highlight other people adopting that and building community that way. Also, what really helps for faculty are these rubrics. I'm working on a tool to make it so that it's not such a wall of text that hits people in the face and is a lot to read through, because it is overwhelming and unnecessary to try to assess the entirety of a listed literacy. So almost nobody is going to say, for instance, assess all of number 8, employing effective knowledge practices. You'd pick one, for instance, using version control uh, to highlight within the way you're actually teaching to and what you're assessing the students on, and then providing them with that rubric so that they're able to see what they're expected to do, and then have those reflective components where they're assessing themselves along the way, not just at the end, not just summative assessment, but formative assessment is built into the process so that students are able to understand where they are falling short while they still have time to build those competencies and improve. And here are the places where I pulled those images from and the link to our website. And thanks for y'all's attention. And I look forward to seeing what curriculum y'all are doing and seeing what else y'all are talking about in your talks. Thanks.
Thank you, Morgan. So our final presentation for this session is titled Re-emerging Technologies in Academic Libraries from Yitzi Paul.
Howdy, y'all. So if anybody was at ACTAL this past year, I apologize. This is essentially the same thing, just like 3 times faster that I did there. So my name is Yitzi Paul. I am the unit head for emerging technologies and experiential learning at Boise State University. I'm better known for its physical space, the Maker Lab, on the first floor of the library. Got about 14 years of media makerspace library experience. Climbed the library ladder from student worker to staff and to tenure track librarian. And I recently authored a chapter in Elsevier's Encyclopedia of Libraries, Librarianship, and Information Science. So I'm going to talk about vintage tech. I asked AI, like we all tend to do nowadays, to make an image of vintage technology to kind of help define it. But it's super subjective. It's very generational, so it depends on the age of the person that you're talking to. But it can kind of be boiled down to technology that's no longer ubiquitous. And so these are technologies that have kind of fallen by the wayside. Subjectively, 20 years older or later tends to be the kind of like industry standard for what you would consider vintage technology. So emerging technologies can be defined through a few very buzzy words that I'm sure we're all sort of aware of as people that work in these kind of spaces that tend to house emerging technologies. But they tend to have a sense of radical novelty to them. So they're new, they're novel, they have fast growth, so they tend to iterate and change very quickly. There's a sense of coherence to them, so there's a logic to why they exist in the now. They tend to be pretty impactful. So what kind of impact can they make on your day to day? But there is some level of uncertainty and ambiguity. So what is this? How does it work? Where is it going? I've found that through integrating some vintage technologies in my makerspace that these pieces of tech can exhibit many of the same characteristics. So I've kind of dubbed it re-emerging technologies. So they tend to have the same novelty. What is this old thing? They less about the growth, but there is a logic to them. There is impact to them as well. And again, there's that ambiguity or uncertainty. Why is this here? What is this doing? Why are we using it? So I have 2 cases that I'd like to share that are in my Maker Lab, my makerspace right now. One is vintage pen plotters. So this we kind of inherited through sort of a dig into a pen plotter that we had beforehand to the vintage, and then 2 Chandler and Price letterpresses that came to us from the graphic design department here because they had too many and they needed to surplus them, and we felt very poorly that they were going to get melted down. So first, the pen plotter. These historically were precursors to the color printer. So if a Fortune 500 company, like this person in this beautiful photo, needed to do a pie chart and they needed it in color, they would use a pen plotter. They were made by a few companies like Hewlett-Packard, Roland, Houston Instruments. But then they fell by the wayside. The inkjet was invented shortly thereafter, and these ended up in closets, which were then found by weirdos like me, and went, can we interface with these? And so, yes, it was figured out that we could. And there was also a small subset of people that remembered these things, and were still creating them. And so they do still exist to this day as modern technologies. So to my right, we have the AxiDraw, which is actually now the NextDraw. They were purchased by Bantam Tools, a relatively popular CNC router company. They were built in this century. They're known as iBots. There's a lot of knockoffs that are out there that you can buy as well. They just, move a robot arm on an XY axis, and lift up a pen using a servo motor, which is essentially the same thing that the vintage plotters do. And so to the left is an HP 7475A creating a piece of art, multi-layered grayscale art. And it is moving a paper more on a what you would see in a Cricut, like a vinyl cutter method, and lifting that pen up with a solenoid. So slightly different. We discovered these vintage plotters through going onto AxiDraw's support Discord. So they had a Discord server that was there to help with support. And one of the owners talked about how they had a vintage plotter, and they pointed to another Discord that had its own sub-channel about vintage plotters. And so a student of mine and me kind of got down in a rabbit hole about it, which resulted in me personally now with 12 vintage pen plotters in my garage, and a somewhat annoyed spouse when they keep showing up. With these pieces of technologies, the first step is, making it work, because they typically aren't being used in a way where it's easy to just kind of jump right in. So for the vintage pen plotters, it came to how do we connect it to a modern day computer? And it depends on what the connection style was. So serial connection tends to be the most popular for these types of plotters. And there is a very established way on doing it. So much so that it is pinned in that vintage pen plotter sub-channel. And when people ask about how to interface it, there is someone that will go read the pin message. Don't try to do anything different. Just read the pin message, please, please, please. Parallel is another style of interfacing that's relatively easy, but it has its own difficulties. And then there is a final one that HP like to use when in a lab setting called GPIB. And we call that hard mode because it is extremely hard to interface with. The right-hand picture is actually a Arduino, a Raspberry Pi hat that goes on top of your Raspberry Pi in order to interface with GPIB plotters. That was made by a single person that cared about this enough to make a interface for these older, harder plotters to connect with. So it'll essentially connect to it, and then it will feed it the information it needs to the way that GPIB needs it fed, which is a little different. Then you have to find pens. These plotters hold pens in a very specific way. So you either have to find what we call new old stock. So basically go onto eBay and find, people that are still selling these pens and pray that they haven't dried out. Or there is a group of people that have created adapters for these plotters that you can then 3D print. Then you need to actually make, have it draw. The best way to do that is through translating scalable vector graphics, so SVGs, because SVGs are essentially just lines. And we're just drawing on a glorified XY, coordinate graph. And so what you can do is you can take your lines and translate it into directional data that it can then utilize. This can be done multiple different ways, but again, one singular person created a wonderful command line interface to take scalable vector graphic files and turn them into HPGL optimized for plotting. And so that was VPipe. And so you can see this is a very tight-knit community that cares. And then you start drawing it. So you draw these vector graphics, and you can also actually do some bitmap conversions as well through yet another piece of software that was created by a singular person who cares quite a bit about these pieces of technologies. So why have them in your makerspace? Uh, Partly because there is a really interesting holistic, or what I call synergistic, flow that can happen in makerspaces with these pieces of technologies. So for pen plotters, you have this immediate, you can 3D print a fix to it. But there's also some very interesting code-based things that you can utilize it for teaching. So generative art is really, really cool, but it's even cooler when you can actually have it be drawn afterwards. So it's a really great way to teach folks processing, JavaScript, other types of code-based software, and give them a physical item at the end of it. There's also a wonderful little piece of software called Plotty Bird that allows you to create a playable version of Flappy Bird that is being drawn in situ. And it has become one of the best ways for us to table or just show off our space to people when we have to do fests and things like that. And then again, there are ways to convert bitmaps to line art, and that's another really great teaching tool. The second piece of equipment that we have in our space that we've been utilizing that is a very vintage piece of technology is our two Chandler and Price letterpresses. One of them is from 1880, the other one is from 1910. And we were given nothing with them outside of chases, rollers, and the plot to put the ink on. So while we were given these wonderful behemoths, we did not really know what to do with them because we did not get the full kit. So that led us down a rabbit hole of making it work. And so typically you have something called keys or coins that allows you to lock into a chase using furniture, which is basically wood that it fills in the blank space of your type. But we had none of that. And so we chose to press fit. So we have pieces of machinery that have pretty good dimensional accuracy to them. And so we can 3D print something that would fit a chase that we measured with a caliper. Um, I was doing this personally, and I had a student go, "This is taking too much time. Is there another way that we could do this?" And so we figured a way to actually laser cut um, and then using a dowel system kind of hold it all together in order to do this faster because they were getting impatient with sitting there waiting for the 3D printed thing to finish 3D printing. Um, the next is kind of like, what do you do in order to show that this works? These were made to churn out hundreds of items at a time. And so if you are going to ink this, you want to churn out hundreds of things because the cleanup for it is pretty messy. So we settled on carbon paper. And so we would put carbon paper down and we would make our pressings and we would see if we got our height correct or anything like that in order to kind of like do very quick one-offs. We have inked it once and that's where we kind of learned that and you use oil-based ink because if you use water-based, you run the risk of rusting basically everything on it. And we learned two things. One, it's very hard to get, you have to use a lot of solvents to get oil ink off. And also, if it falls on the floor and it gets on someone's shoe, they will track it forever. And so if you are on carpet like we are, you need to be very, very careful. Um, Again, there's some really interesting flows within a space like ours with these pieces of technology. So you can 3D print your type, you can laser cut your type, you can CNC route, you can get really, precision milling into it with um, lathes and so on. There is some publication on this, and I am actually running uh, a grant-funded project with a local career technical education class in the Boise area to have them go to our space in our engineering's makerspace to interrogate this problem, to try and create type in multiple different methods and research whether one works better than the other and kind of the cost benefit analysis of that. And so I'm really excited to start that up in April. Um, so great in a space, great for people to play around with, but how do you kind of make this a little bit deeper? And so it's actually relatively easy to get vintage technology into curriculum if you're teaching classes. So art's a really easy one to kind of fit in with these kind of artistic devices. The humanities has been a really wonderful place for us with these. One of my biggest champions is a professor in writing who desperately wants to create a space for the book as art, which very colloquially can be known as a book lab. And so we've been working very hard together. He teaches a class on book as art, and they come into our space and try to utilize our technology um, to make editions of any type of work, but do it in an extremely creative way. History department ended up becoming a really great champion for us as well because they teach the history of the 90s, which makes me cringe, and it hurts a little bit that we are teaching the history of the 90s at this point. But this is where this animated GIF comes from. We took one of our I have a laptop from the 90s running a program from the 90s connected to a plotter from the 90s, and I was able to show them how this would have operated in the 90s. We also played Doom, which was fun as well. Uh, and also there's, computer science and engineering. I've had conversations with the engineering folks about, are there ways to create pen adapters that are a little bit more robust than 3D printing? And I've talked with computer science folks about um, going the next step with that kind of like plotty bird. Like, how else can we interface with these vintage technologies that draw in creative ways? And so it's giving some of these folks that are in a traditionally STEM environment that STEAM part of it, a little bit of creativity, which is really kind of exciting for me. There are a couple lessons that we've learned from doing this. One is, don't work in a vacuum. It's very easy for administration to not understand what you're doing, bringing these pieces of technologies into your spaces. So it's very helpful to find people that you can that can be your champions when you do this. Also find your collaborators. One of my best collaborators is another librarian within Albertson's library who works in special collections and university archives, but they run the Idaho Center for the Book, which is the center for the book within Idaho that then selects a book, two books every year, and takes it to the National Book Festival. And part of their charge is the book as art. Find support. So the internet is a wonderful place full of wonderful people that care about these things. And so it's very useful to find support, find help in these spaces. Discord has become this really great community for these things. And faculty as well. Again, that English Lit professor has been incredible and has actually found grant opportunities for us to purchase other printing presses that are being made to this day. One that's very popular called the Book Beetle that will allow us to do kind of multi-offs without having to use the Chandler and Price printing presses, which can be pretty cumbersome to use. And then generate engagement. And so we started a fan art exhibit within the library, and we encouraged students and faculty and staff that submitted to this fan art exhibit to use our technology. And we had someone use the vintage pen plotter to create Miss Piggy and Kermit in a kind of saint-ish way, which was really kind of great. These things can take some time to work with, so it's important to find time, which can be extremely hard, which is where the I'm not doing it right, but I'm doing it ethos can kind of come into play really well. Because they're vintage and there's not a lot of people that are telling you you're doing it wrong, you can do it wrong and still do it. And so press fitting is not the correct way of using a letterpress like that. Carbon paper, or even messing a little bit around with um, water-based paint is not the way to use these pieces of technology, but they're getting use when they wouldn't, which is extremely important. Um, so looking into the future of how to utilize these technologies or how or where else we can go, I've had a lot of students express interest in analog film. A lot of them have purchased point and shoot cameras or SLR cameras, but they have to go to the one um, place that will actually process film in our city. And that is a huge money suck for them. And they're kind of beholden to them. And so, as someone who dabbled in analog
See,
photography,
I'm sorry,
yep,
I have to interrupt you just because we're over time.
okay, I'll
I don't
finish up.
just say like one final thought.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the final thoughts with this is there's some really interesting synergy on this. It can enhance experiential learning. It creates a new level of access for your space. It can attract people. It can attract a older generation of folks. And there's a really interesting sustainability approach to this. Instead of allowing these things to end up in landfills, we can find places for them in our spaces.
Thank you, Yitzi, and
Yep.
thanks to all of our presenters for their wonderful presentations. I wish we had a little more time to keep talking, but I saw a lot of great conversation in the chat. So thanks to everybody who participated. And just a reminder, please check out the project website after today. You'll be able to access all of the presentations and get presenter contact info and so on. So thank you all so much. We have a little break and we'll see you all for Lightning Talk sessions C and D. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, it is 2 o'clock, so we will get started. Let me actually share my screen. Find the right screen here. Is everyone seeing the
You spotlight.
It of course disappeared for me. Oh, here we go. Okay. Everyone's seeing the background that says Academic Library Makerspaces. Okay, anyway, it'll only be there for a minute. So welcome. This is Track D, Academic Library Makerspaces. We've got 3 amazing lightning talks for you.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt. We're actually still just seeing we're seeing a spreadsheet right now.
Ah! How? Why?
There we go. Thank you.
Okay. I swear I know how to do this. All right. So yes, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started right away. Well, we still have, let's see. Okay, good. Yeah, everyone's in the same room here. Okay, so welcome everyone. We will get started right away because we have 3 amazing lightning talks that we'd like to get through today and have time for questions afterwards. So our first lightning talk will be Dean Walton, who will be presenting why the right workshop matters. So I will go ahead and spotlight Dean so that everyone can see Dean, and I will stop my sharing so that Dean can share his slides, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure being here today. And I am going to be an old white guy talking about electronics. However, that said, I do want to say that I have managed or faculty advisor for an all-women student ham radio club and a robotics and rocketry club that was driven by another female student. Because there's a lot of women who want to learn electronics. And so that has been sort of my goal. A lot of our patrons are coming from computer science and physics. I'm at the University of Oregon, and we have an incredible craft center right next door to where I am. We also have another music and podcasting lab in another building. So our lab defers to pretty much sort of STEM-oriented things. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So, what is it? Why is it important to have the right workshop? Well, you want people to be successful. And in order for that to happen, you need to know your target audience. You need to make sure that it's a safe and comfortable place. You need to know that it's sort of scalable, that material costs are manageable. Is it too technical or not technical enough for your audience? And do you have the right amount of time? And that's what I think about a lot. But then we have failed at times to think about it from the patron's perspective. And that's like, what am I going to learn as a student? And will I be successful in completing this project? Is it going to be a stressful thing to do? And am I going to be happy with the end result? And I'm going to say that, we have failed at times and we've done well at times. And here's one of our successful failures, I'll say. So one of the first things we did when we opened our space, and I've been a manager of a makerspace for about 10 years and then had an engineering club before that, and then a little robotics club even before that. But it was like, hey, let's build this ultrasonic bat detector. We put it out to the campus. It filled up immediately. However, that said, this product cost $30. So we wound up finding that we had more faculty and staff members joining or signing up than we had students. The students couldn't afford it in some cases. And then when it came to the end, the faculty and staff finished their products and the students didn't. And then also, we didn't really have the opportunity to discuss really what was going on here. and how this thing worked. So success in we filled up the workshop, but the target audience of students, we kind of failed them. So we went to simplify things. So let's try, with our, again, physics and computer science related folks, let's do something slightly simpler. Let's work on doing some CAD work and say making a 10 millimeter, box and open end wrench. This was great. It was successful. Students could do it in an hour workshop. It was scalable. We could do this small groups. We could have summer camps coming in where we get high school students doing the same project, all being successful. We could print this in a short period of time, and it wasn't that costly for us. So that was great. But it was still a little bit more simple than we wanted because we knew we had folks who had that interest in electronics. So next goal, let's simplify what we're doing and have something that is manageable, doable. And so we came up with the idea of, going to YouTube to find out what was out there, building an alternating current circuit detector. Because we found that building sensor systems engage people. They could build a tool and then use that tool to explore the world around them. So building sensors was a really, really powerful thing for a lot of students. This thing here, all parts included, was basically just $1.50. I don't know if my mouse shows up, but the battery here was $1, and the rest of the stuff here really was about 30 cents. So it's quite manageable. We have an LED, we have 3 resistors, and we have 3 transistors. And I'll sort of explain how these things work. And then we have a little antenna thing here. And so the concept is to detect AC current. And in this example here, we have AC current running through part of our system to power our computer. It goes up to the power supply, and the output from the power supply is DC current. But because of the voltage and current flowing through here, there is what we'll call energy that leaks out through the wires. And we can detect that energy and use it to trigger our sensor. So this is how this works. We can create a sensor, we can use it, and our device should light up when it detects, when it gets near a wire like this. Here's the lineup, and this requires us making a pretty strong amplifier because we are just looking at really, really small amounts of electricity emanating from these wires. But when we line up these 3 transistors right here in a fashion, we have a 110,000, 1 million fold amplification of what comes in here. And I'll explain a little bit more about how the whole amplifier kind of thing works too, because this is what our students wanted. They wanted to understand a bit more about electronics. So we have an LED, which lights up when the AC current's detected. We have our 3 transistors, or 3 resistors. These transistor and resistor, or resistor and transistor, all work in tandem. They work in tandem like this set of dominoes right here. We have a small domino, and when we have an input from our detector, the AC current, it has the ability to knock over that first domino, which in turn knocks over a second domino, which in turn knocks over the largest domino. And this is this amplification. In our case, we have a 1 million-fold amplification of that initial power coming out of that wire. So very high amplification. In this sense here, the important thing we need to do is we need to scale those dominoes. So here we have our first set, and we have just basically microvolts being generated to come in here, but we can size a small domino with this resistor and our transistor, which can let 100 times what the current feels. Now, when we knock over the domino, gravity is pulling down the domino. The electricity emitting from the wire is the trigger, but the gravity pulls down the domino. And in this case here, it's the battery that powers, that is equivalent to domino. Well, the battery is equivalent to the domino being pulled over. So battery and gravity. And then we triple up this scenario, Again, current is detected here. It generates electricity because it's emanating from the wire. We have it detected here. We have a battery pushing power through here, and there's 100-volt power through here. That triggers this one, triggers this one. You have all three dominoes coming over, which then allows enough power to come through the system to power the LED. That's it soldered up. We have 12 soldering joints in the system. So the students have a chance to solder this together with our 12. They have 12 opportunities to solder it together. And basically what we found is that this was a system that really, really worked for us. You could try other things, but again, trial and error. We found something that was doable. It was doable in time frame. It was cost effective. People weren't too stressed. They could learn to use a soldering iron. They could get it done in an hour. And to me, the important part at the end was, were we successful? And so we would ask them at the end, did you like this? Did you feel you learned something? And the answer was yes. So, getting that feedback, but then also watching the end result. To us, the most powerful indication of success is that we saw our students showing their friends how their sensor system worked and how an amplifier kind of worked by using the analogy of dominoes, of having a small signal being powered by a battery, knocking over things in series to create a much larger signal that can light a light bulb to let us know that we have an AC current generating there. And so that is it. If you feel like you've learned maybe a tad more about how maybe an amplifier works, an AC current circuit works, let me know in the chat. And if it was a waste of time, let me know too. And with that, I have time's up right now. 10 minutes. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean. That was a great project to hear about. And we will be doing questions for all three lightning talks at the end of the session. So we'll be moving right along to Amber Sewell, who will be presenting game jamming in academic libraries. Really excited. So I'll send it on right along to Amber.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I'm really excited to chat with you about game jamming in academic libraries. My name is Amber Sewell, she, her. I'm a teaching and learning librarian at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I work primarily with students in their general education courses. I also do a lot of gaming events co-curricularly, and I work with faculty to incorporate fandom, pop culture, games, and play into their classrooms. To start, what is a game jam? I think these are a little more popular in public libraries, not so much academic libraries. But these are events where attendees come together to either A, create an original game based around a prompt, or B, to iterate on an existing game. So to take a game and kind of make a new version of it. These can happen with digital games. These often happen with tabletop role-playing games, but these can also involve physical games. Because this event was intended to promote the Makerspace as a resource and fun, creative place for students to go, my participants were asked to create original physical games. So these could be board games, card games, anything where they are creating the game pieces in the Makerspace. Some details of the events. I am kind of the spearhead for this, in charge of kind of keeping everything organized. I took this idea to my supervisor to do the initial one for International Games Month, which is in November 2022. My boss said, sounds great. So I took it to Darcy Del Bosque, who's the head of research, innovation, and creation, which houses the Makerspace here. I pitched it to their team, and they were really enthusiastic about it. So I then paired up with our making and innovation specialist, who's kind of in charge of the day-to-day of the Makerspace, and we really collaborated on building this event together. I also tagged in our educational outreach librarian, who helped with a lot of the logistics, as well as purchasing the prizes for the event. And then I worked with student employees who helped me staff the voting table where games were out for anybody who walked through the library to play and then vote on the games. I've done this twice so far. The first, as I mentioned, was November 2022, and then I did a second iteration last September. So the timeline for the event, first, as soon as possible, get the event out there where students know it's happening, recruit participants. Fall is a very busy time for our library marketing department, so depending on all of the things they've got going on for a welcome week and other beginning of the semester events, they're the ones who kind of make sure this gets out to students via email, that it's posted online, that flyers are available. The beginning of the month is our kickoff event in the Makerspace. Students are heavily encouraged to have their Makerspace orientation completed before this meeting. This is where all of the teams gather to learn about the rules and guidelines for the events, get to know the faces of the people that can help them throughout the event. We tell them a little bit about the Makerspace and the resources available for them, and then they have time to get started with their projects. They have 3 weeks to build their game in the Makerspace, and then they have to turn them into me at the end of that 3rd week. I then take them, and then the next week is voting. So I set up a table in the lobby of the library with the games and my voting forms and ask people to stop and play for a couple of minutes and then vote. And then at the end of the month, we have our award ceremony. So just to show what this looks like, fall of 2024, we started promoting as soon as marketing was able to. Our kickoff event was September 3rd. The games were due to me on September 24th by 5 p.m. And then the next day they were out in the lobby for voting. Voting ended October 2nd. I tabulated all of the scores that evening, and then we announced the winner the next day in the Makerspace. Some required elements that I designed to facilitate this event first were the sign-up form. This was just a Google form. I asked every team to choose a communications person. So they filled out the team, gave me their team name, and listed the team members. That also gave them some key dates for the event, and then also reiterated that all members should have their Makerspace safety orientation completed before that kickoff event. I created some rules and guidelines. These included things like you must use 2 to 3 Makerspace machines. The game needs to be unmediated because this will just be put on a table for people to play. So they need to be able to have all of the materials they need for that there. Gave them the team budget. Each team gets $25 of Makerspace credit. And then it gave them details about working in the Makerspace because I didn't want to overwhelm the Makerspace if we had full capacity sign up. We allow for 5 teams of 2 to 3 people each. I didn't want to be taking up all of their resources just with this game. So I worked with that making and innovation specialist to determine some days our Makerspace doesn't open till 11. So we would have the Makerspace open 9 to 11 just for these teams. Included some game design tips. Things like make sure to include instructions, have somebody read over them first. Prototyping is really important, so make sure you take advantage of the free prototyping materials in the Makerspace before jumping into the fun machines. We did have a prototyping workshop this iteration, which I hope to improve on in the future. I create a voting form. These are just half sheets of paper I print out that have the 4 criteria, stars 1 to 5, and then circle the name of the game you played, and then prizes. So the first year, it was just a 3D printed trophy that I had made. This year, we were actually able to give our winning team tickets to Dice Tower West. So that way, if they wanted to bring their prototype and play and get feedback at that convention, they could. Participation and reception. In the November 2022 event, I had 3 participants across 2 teams. One of them was just somebody who walked in during the kickoff event because it sounded cool. They didn't even sign up. And it's a good thing they did because they won that year. Last semester, we had 6 participants across 2 teams. So our winner from the first year came back with some friends and was on the winning team again. Students really loved it. They had a great time getting to be creative outside of the classroom experience. They thought it was a lot of fun. I asked them for feedback. They definitely don't want more than 5 weeks for this project because I asked if this should be like a semester long. And they were like, no, that would distract too much from everything else going on. But we'd really like 4 weeks to build and then a fifth week to vote. They are also interested in guided next steps. So for instance, as you can see, we budgeted $25 for 5 teams. We've not hit team capacity and all of the teams have come in under budget. So we're thinking about maybe repurposing that fund to give to the winning team so they can make a more high fidelity version of their game, especially if we want to continue to give them tickets to Dice Tower West to test out their game. I've learned a lot of lessons about running game jams that I can't cover in 10 minutes, but some of the most important ones is there's always room for improvement with marketing. Students are always like, I wish I'd heard about this sooner. I wish more people had heard. Timing is super important. Turns out November's a terrible time to do a month-long event in academic libraries. Not only are people getting sick, but there are so many vacations and days off that it's hard for students to get momentum, especially with their classwork, not to mention this extra project they're doing on top of them. So avoid November. I've learned to provide more guidance than I think I need. So I forget that I am kind of immersed in the game design world. And so students in the first round, I didn't explicitly remind them about instructions. So both teams had forgotten about it and were like handwriting them 30 minutes before they had to turn the game in. So providing more structure. Coordinating again with the Makerspace about resource management, making sure I'm not overloading them with this game, but also seeing if their student workers, for instance, are interested in doing consultations with the teams about their ideas. Lastly, communicate with the students frequently, but don't always expect to get communication back. Again, this is not for a class, this is for fun, so they're not always the fastest to answer emails. Next steps, I'm going to try out a game jam in the spring. This was a recommendation from our last team. They really liked the idea of having spring break without classes to work on their games. Again, having longer sign-up time so more people can hear about it. I have not included a prompt previously because I was afraid it would constrain students too much, but the last group said that they actually think it would be really helpful for them to direct some of their focus, so to give a theme, even if it's just fantasy or space. I'd like to provide more structured support throughout, so more focused workshops that are smaller during that working time. And then my students have really encouraged me to brainstorm bigger, so partnering with our Patent and Trademark Resource Center. UNLV students are very entrepreneurial, so they want to take these big ideas. There's a lot more that goes into Game Jam, so I'm always happy to chat more and share resources, so please feel free to reach out.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Amber. I am already just chatted a coworker about potentially doing a game jam. Love the idea. Okay, great. So we'll move right along to Monica Maselli. I hope I said your name correctly. If not, please correct me when you start your presentation. Monica will be presenting implementing maker projects outside of the makerspace, and we will move right along.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Monica Michelli. I'm an associate professor at Pratt School of Information, and generally my teaching and research is around emerging technologies in the library world. I'm actually going to talk today very briefly about a couple studies. Initially, I was very interested in work that was being done with maker technologies outside of the boundaries of the makerspace. So how maker technologies were being applied to different problems in the wider library space. So this was a couple years ago. I did Zoom interviews with 12 librarians who had published information about a maker technology focused project that they had created for their library. The bulk of the projects were using Raspberry Pi and Arduino to give you a sense of the technologies. The first research question that I was exploring was how specifically these librarians had applied maker technologies in projects in wider library usage. The most popular project, and you can see a list of the top 12 or so projects on the right of the screen. The most popular project involved using Raspberry Pis to run digital signage throughout the library spaces. And there were a variety of other one-off projects, really anywhere from gate counting, patrons temperature monitoring, opaque terminal replacements, and other more creative ones. There was projects using a receipt printer to print poetry for patrons to raise awareness of a poetry event and week that was being hosted at the library. As part of this research, I also explored what these librarians felt would be necessary from a skills and knowledge perspective to allow a broader set of librarians to contribute to this work. And really the large takeaway from this was you don't have to have a background in IT. You don't need to be a computer scientist. You need a general exposure to scripting languages and coding. But more than anything, you need this willingness, as one participant says, to try things out, experiment, and tinker. So really accepting bumps in the road, that there may be successes and failures, and having that persistence to keep trying. So coming out of that initial research, I put together code for 5 of the most popular and accessible projects that librarians had discussed implementing in their libraries, created a GitHub library of that with the intention of making these projects more available to the wider librarian community, as well as also lower the barrier to actually implementing these in other folks' libraries if they desired. So the next phase of this project was taking the GitHub library of tutorials and code samples that we had developed and employ it in a case study, which we did at the Pratt Institute Academic Library here at Pratt. And the goal was to see how these projects would actually fare in practice, whether librarians could follow the materials to both gain inspiration about what they may want to do with their maker technologies in the wider library sphere, and also to be able to iterate and improve on the educational materials that we had developed. So we have 2 library locations at Pratt Institute, a small library and a main library. And we contacted the individual in the role of user experience librarian, and he and a few other staff members were the key contacts during this project. He chose what projects out of that list of projects in the GitHub that he would like to implement in the libraries. They did end up creating 2 digital signage platforms, as well as 2 Raspberry Pi devices that were serving as online public access catalog stations, which are typically low cost, low power computers that are placed throughout the library so patrons can easily access catalog records on site. So this was a longitudinal study in which the case study participants built the projects and ran them for about an 8-week period. And I conducted interviews with the main participant at the beginning, middle, and end of the study. And I also asked him to try to track loosely the amount of time spent and any other questions, comments, or issues that came up in a diary that was kept on Google Sheets and available to both myself as the researcher and the participant. Just to give you a sense visually of what some of these projects looked like, I'm imagining probably most folks here are familiar with the Raspberry Pi. So you see on the left the Raspberry Pi, which is a single board computer, very popular in the making world. This is actually a fairly old version of the Raspberry Pi. So we wanted to make sure the projects would be accessible for makerspaces that were not necessarily purchasing the most recent hardware. So this was the digital signage display project. As I'm sure you're familiar, digital signs rotate different information, opening hours, other information of interest in typically public spaces of the libraries. So my interviews with librarians revealed that there was a lot of usage and appreciation of the Screenly open source software, which is able to run on Raspberry Pi. So this was what the participants used. This was a smaller display screen that was run in the smaller size library. And then in the main library, there was a pretty nice setup with running a larger display screen placed near a passageway, so with a lot of foot traffic in that area. On the left of the screen, you can see the screen in place and in use, and in the right, you can see zoomed in the little Raspberry Pi kind of placed on top of the screen that's actually operating the display software. So the second project they implemented, as I said, was using the Raspberry Pi to host the library catalog website, so to serve as an OPAC kiosk in the library. This project ended up being a little rockier, and there were some performance issues with the Raspberry Pi, but just a few screenshots of this. Again, it doesn't look any different than any other public access station setup, but behind the scenes, the Raspberry Pi is running the kiosk platform. So really what I was interested in learning from both these studies, in particular the case study, is just how feasible is the use of maker technologies in the library outside of the makerspace. And generally the findings were that the projects tended to be easy to implement initially, and they could serve as low-cost, flexible alternatives to traditional library technology. They also notably gave the librarians and staff quite a bit more control over how the project was developed, where the data was going, who was in control, and you can see that opinion mirrored in the quote from the case study participant on the right there. However, as I'm sure you're all familiar with maker technologies, there's plenty of technical issues that can come up, and one of the projects, the OPAC station, was eventually abandoned because the Raspberry Pi just simply wasn't powerful enough from the hardware perspective to run the station smoothly. So coming out of that case study, we did revise educational materials based on the participants' comments, as well as diary study feedback that came up along the way during the 8-week period. So attempting to make these materials clearer and also make note of potential issues people may encounter. Oops. So just to wrap up with the practical implications here, I think there's a lot of potential for maker technologies to be moving kind of outside of the constraints of the makerspace itself. The focus of this research was really around, well, how can we use these technologies to contribute to our practical needs within library spaces? But I think another theme that emerged from talking with participants is that this also serves as a really nice opportunity to share these different technologies with people that may not necessarily be coming into the makerspace or think of themselves as someone that's interested in the makerspace. So just literally physically getting these technologies into more wider use in the library where someone could come across them also served as an advertisement in part for the makerspace itself. And then lastly, continuing on this work, as I said, we did build out the GitHub library with these popular library projects, and I'm hoping to continue to develop that and make it even more accessible to folks that perhaps don't have pre-existing experience with these technologies. So I'm just about out of time here, but you can see my contact information here, as well as a couple of the publications that came out of this research. Most recently on the case study, the publication is from the Information Technology and Libraries ITAL journal. So if you're interested in learning more about the projects or the process, there's plenty more there. All right, thank you for listening.
Okay, great. So we have a few minutes for questions. I've been monitoring the chat throughout, and we have some lovely comments just praising everyone's great work. We have one question from Atlas asking if Monica has any materials for the initial projects that let's see. We looked at the poem receipt maker. Do you have the Git? Okay, that was easy. There you go. We have that link now. And then there was a question for Amber about the turnout for events. How has your turnout been? You can either answer in the chat or should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, you are already unmuted.
Yeah, like I mentioned, we had 3 participants and 2 teams in the first iteration, and then for the one we did in the fall, it had 2 teams with 3 people each. And then for the award ceremony, which I use very loosely, it's often the team members, myself, and the Making and Innovation Specialist, and then the head of my department and the head of the department the Makerspace is in will often show up and just kind of praise the teams for the awesome work they did, but also ask questions about how they would like future events to go.
Okay. Does your university have like a game design program or like minor or major or anything like that?
You know, I should know that. I don't believe so. No, it looks like the closest we've got is a Bachelor of Science in Entertainment Technology and Design, but nothing game design in particular.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So let me see, I'm put my display back on grid mode here. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and you should have the option to unmute yourself at this point. So I'll give everyone a chance to do that. Or you can put them in the chat and I'm happy to read those out for you.
Hi, I had a question for Dean. Really interesting work, and it's cool you got participants soldering during the workshop. I was just curious if you had considered any of the available games or things where you kind of teach when you teach like circuit building, or whether you wanted the focus to be really something hands-on and very kind of DIY.
We wanted it to be more DIY and using the components that people would see like in a TV set kind of thing. A lot of times today, you use surface mount technology, so the components are the size of grains of rice. And we've done some workshops where we build FM radios doing surface mount technology. But in this case, we wanted something larger. The surface mount, you use a heat gun or a toaster oven, and you fuse components onto a circuit board. And the students really wanted to learn soldering. Again, we have folks from computer science and physics who wanted that physical process, and the bat detector was just too much. And so this was simplified, and it gave them something larger that they could play around with. And the example was something that seemed to work for us because they were very excited to like show it off after the fact kind of thing.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks for the question.
Oh, great questions. I'm gonna see if anyone else speaks up. I'd have one more for Monica. I'd love to ask, but don't want to take over. Okay, I'm gonna go for it. So Monica, I wonder if you've ever had, and maybe forgive me if you mentioned this in your presentation and I missed it, but have you ever had students or student workers or anything like that take part in these projects that happen? Because it sounded like it's mostly library staff that are doing these projects, but do you ever use it as a learning opportunity for students as well?
Yeah, I actually, so since we have, we have our master's in library science program, we actually have a lot of intersection between the students that we teach and the students that are employed in our libraries, usually as graduate assistants. So I don't know that there were any that were directly hands-on when the case study was running, but part of what I did in the development of the project was have at least, I think, 3 total students go through the projects and work on setting them up. And I specifically look for students that really had no pre-existing experience in this area. So I'll say for the most part, they were serving as testers at this stage. I do some research also on makerspace education within LIS, and I have taught before at Pratt a physical computing class and trying to start to introduce these technologies and these skill sets kind of actually within the library science program is also something that I'm interested in working further on in the future.
That's so amazing. And I know we need to end up in the session, but I'd love to chat with you more about that if you
Sure.
are interested. I'm gonna put my email in the chat. I'm also, I think my information is on the grant website, but oh, I just put my Gmail. That's not right. It's Friday. My brain is mush. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so
Perfect. Yeah.
much for from all 3 of our presenters. I enjoyed this very much, and we will see everyone at one of the next lightning talks and at the closing session. Take care. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, everybody. We are now in Lightning Talk Session F, Evidence-Based Practice and Assessment. For this session, we've got 3 different presenters. They're each going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end. I hear somebody. Okay, I think we're good. All right, so our first presentation is called Overlap of Evidence-Based Practice and the Maker Movement from Jimmy Gonzalez-Vicker. So Jimmy, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen really quickly. It wants to load. We just did this. It's still loading. Ah, there we go. All right, can everybody see what I see?
Looking good for me.
All right, great. So hi, everybody. Like Emily said, my presentation is Overlap of Evidence-Based Practice in the Maker Movement, and I will explain both in just a second. So first, a little bit about me. So hi, I am relatively new in my position at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I currently work as the liaison to the College of Dentistry for the Library of the Health Sciences. I can truly say that I have learned more about dentistry and health sciences over the past year than I thought I would know in my lifetime. And it's just it's a really great and fun position. And go. So first thing I want to discuss is evidence-based practice. I want to make sure we all have a very clear starting point. So coming into the job, I really did have an idea of what evidence-based practice was, how our professionals are trained in the healthcare system. Oh, I hear a buzzing sound. Does anyone else hear the buzzing sound? No, went away. About how our professionals are trained. So the 3 pillars of that include clinical expertise, patient values and preferences, and then the best available evidence. Now, there's a little bit of room there to include professional opinion and things like that. So that's where I think it can really kind of blossom into a clinical decision made by a professional opinion with someone who's had the experience and has done the research. In addition to dentistry, on the UIC Medical Campus, so we're west of the Circle campus, we've got dentistry, nursing, and medicine. We also have applied health sciences and public health. And then we got the maker movement. So for the current research that I'm doing, I really am interested in understanding how information science can be further integrated into evidence-based practice. As we all have experienced, and we go through information crisis after information crisis in the past few weeks, I think it just really solidifies the idea of what type of things are needed. And one of those things being the subfield of the maker movement, and as a clear part of library and information science, that's where my interest stemmed. So per a literature review of the maker movement within evidence-based practice, there are a few things that became very clear. 3D printing is the most popular. I don't think that's very surprising. From things like tooth implants to accessibility tools to prosthetics, that's where the literature for that really lies. Most of my research was done through PubMed. Other things that are really popular that have less necessarily explanation how it is maker related, but is adjacent to what the maker movement is and what we do, would be prototyping and then biomedical visualization. And that can be using 3D printing to create anatomical models to people who have an art background who end up drawing like hearts and other parts of the body for textbooks and things like that. And then something I thought that was more interesting that I found, including in explanations I've had with faculty, is we're seeing a lot more of, non-traditional students ending up in the health sciences. For example, like artists who joined by medical visualization or go to medical school or dentistry school. And I think that really is helpful and interesting because you have people who have a completely different way of thinking than those who might just be within traditional biology or chemistry. And I think that's super cool. I'm always in for bringing more perspectives into what we do, into how people learn. So in terms of maker spaces in health sciences spaces and libraries, there are some medical centers and hospitals that do have a makerspace. Some of you may be familiar with Rush University. It has a hospital system. It's also in Chicago. It's just right down the street from where the Library of the Health Sciences is in Chicago. And even though that is the case, that is, I would say, particularly rare within the world of the health sciences fields that I've noticed. And most maker opportunities are still coming out of an academic library or a public library that's in the area, and for community engagement efforts, or however they really strategically approach that. So then one of the questions I really had was, what skills from the maker movement can impact evidence-based practice, and then vice versa? How can they evidence-based practice impact the maker spaces? So for this reason, I created a survey earlier, actually the middle of last year, because we're in 2025. Time is not real, but I made it in summer of 2024. And then I primarily made it for people who are maker professionals and people who work in EBP, evidence-based practice. So I really wanted to know, what is their knowledge of each individual respective field? Do you have any experience learning about it? And what skills have you used that could be utilized in a different setting? So in that survey, a definition was provided to each person, and then a few questions followed. Some quick disclosure about the research. I'm currently in the process of putting it together, hopefully for publication. It was approved and reviewed by the University of Illinois IRB board in internal review. I have no identifying information from people who took the surveys, and only complete surveys were collected or were analyzed in the final analysis. And it was the survey was open for 1 month in November 2024. Go to the next slide. There we go. So I'm going to talk about some key findings. We can go. I will happily talk in depth about it if you would like to reach out or read in the future. But for the time frame we have, I'm going to go through it a little bit quickly. But I have some of it laid out in that way. So specifically for maker professionals, hello, one and all maker professionals. For the people that responded, I had 90% of people saying that they were able to apply their previous skills or education to the makerspace that they work in. And I really think that's important to note, that a lot of the different experiences that people have, they can use in the makerspace, which I think is super cool because it's known as a multidisciplinary space for people, but that's also true for working professionals. And I think that's super cool. 56% answered no, or I do not know if they had ever learned about EBP, which is a little bit lower than I thought. I thought a lot more people would not have learned about it because, truthfully, like I said, I had an idea of how our doctors and medical professionals and dentists were trained, but I really didn't have a solid idea of what really goes into that education. Then, similar to the other three pillars of evidence-based practice, specific to patient preference and values, 65% of people who work in makerspaces responded that either staff's observations or patron feedback were very key in decision making, which makes sense. I think in my time in makerspaces, prior to my job now at UIC, I worked in public libraries for 10 years, and we would give out surveys, people would give feedback, and sometimes we were able to apply that feedback very quickly. So I think that really mirrors the idea of you're working with an individual who has certain preferences and certain values and how they would like to move forward, and kind of how you can navigate that. And then with best available evidence, only 39 people said that they used evidence to create the service model or use evidence for decision making in the makerspace. I found that number surprisingly low. Based on some literature searches that I've done, there is a lot of information out there onto how to create a successful service model. Now, it's granted that some of that information is mostly used for places that want to make a profit. However, there is a lot of information about how to create a successful classroom, how to analyze learning, and how to make sure there's a continuous process of inclusive learning. So I think that's one gap that I really identified. And people who work in the EBP sector, a lot of them had noted that they had not learned about the maker movement before, and they had not had much of an opportunity to use any maker skills within their career. However, after giving a list of examples of things that are maker related, because I gave them the definition, but I also gave them a list of like 3D printing, sewing machines, embroidery, vinyl cutting, etc. I had a good amount of people say 3D printing was the most popular, which was not surprising, DIY and art, and vinyl cutting. I was really surprised sewing wasn't on there, because sewing is a fundamental skill that a lot of our professionals learn, or health science professionals learn for suture and wound healing. So I just thought that was interesting. But when I asked them if they thought the maker movement could be integrated into evidence-based practice, 70% said yes. So it's nice to know that there is a clear need for creativity and understanding that it could be included. And now there's just some framework that's needed to kind of create that. So in that paper, that's what I'll really be discussing. I think it's interesting that our research shows that, like, for example, 3D printing is really revolutionizing modern medicine, and that while that might be true, I don't necessarily think always people have the opportunity to use that, whether in through their education or even just learning about it in clinical applications. And really the ultimate goal is to, again, further the idea of access and information science into EBP based on library opportunities. And I think that's really important to include the maker subfield, because the literature can eventually match what we're seeing in clinics and public and private practice. And then I think that is a really just interesting way to make sure that we are present in a different way beyond being able to provide resources for citations and information navigation and things like that. And that's my 10 minutes. Stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you.
And kudos on your bow tie and the watch behind you.
Thank you. Everything's laser cut.
Oh, that's awesome. Of course, even better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next we're going to move to our second presentation, which is titled Empowering What? Using an Evidence-Based Assessment Checklist to Ensure Makerspace Success. And our presenter's name is Shannon Crawford-Barniskis. Shannon, over to you.
Here I am. I was unable to do that for a moment. Here I am. Thank you all. And thanks, Jimmy. That was an awesome segue into my discussion that I'm going to be talking about, where I'm focused in public libraries, makerspaces. I'm going to be looking at an evidence-based assessment that people can use that is grounded in real research of public libraries. So I'm at the University of Kentucky as an assistant professor right now, but I have been in the maker movement in public libraries for a long time. This is a picture from 2012, when we started the first public library makerspace in the state of Wisconsin. I've consulted for a lot of libraries with their makerspaces, and then I shifted over into researching them as a PhD professor. So these are some of the studies that I've done on makerspaces to sort of give you a sense of my bona fides. But I am currently working on a study with both Rebecca Teasdale, that's the last one on physical access, and also I'm looking at makerspaces that fail according to at least some people in a community, like things that have not gone well. Maybe people don't use it as much as expected, or there had to be a major shift in how things were done. If you have one of those makerspaces or you know of one, please contact me. That's just me advertising for a further study. But right now, what I'm going to talk about is this concept of empowering and what that means in the context of public library makerspaces, and how we can use this term to leverage what we're doing and assess it. So when I started in makerspaces, I ran into this word in literally every single article, and it's still in almost every article about public library makerspaces. Somebody will say, these spaces are empowering for our communities and our users. And it sounded so good. But as I looked at that word, I realized I didn't know what it meant exactly. It's not defined ever in the LIS literature. And I can say ever with some confidence. I haven't seen it defined in the makerspace literature other than in my work. So what is happening with this word? Let's break it down a little bit first. So first of all, when we're saying empowering, this is a verb. Something is happening. Somebody is doing something. What are they doing? And first of all, who is doing it? Somebody's putting power. They're empowering. Who is that? Is that libraries? Is that us? Where is the power coming from to begin with? And whoever has it, are they willing to withhold it or only give it to some people? Like, oh, you don't have any fines, you can have the power, but you've got fines, you cannot. That's an interesting question. And another interesting question is power to do what? There's about 100 ways to identify or define power. So what do we mean when we say power? And is that what our users are seeing? Do they know they have the power? And then the last question are the most interesting to me personally. How is this power happening? This is a gerund, this word. There is a process, an ing happening. What's packed inside that ing? What are the practices that are blocking or facilitating power when we say these places are empowering? Well, that's what I asked when all those studies, and this is what I'm found. First of all, empowerment I'm defining as the process by which libraries are supporting people's capability to achieve their goals. And those goals are defined by the individuals, not by the library. And we heard a little about this from Rebecca Teasdale in our opening remarks, that sometimes libraries will get focused on one goal, such as learning, which is a notable, laudable goal that many people share, but not everyone. So I want to step back from that goal and say, what are the goals that people have, and how are we ensuring that they are able to meet those? So I came up with this checklist, and this checklist is derived from mostly from the ethnographic work I did over 400 hours in 3 different libraries and 115 people, where they said, these are the things we need in a makerspace situation to be able to achieve our goals. And you can use this QR code and link directly to a copy of the Convivial Capabilities Checklist, or C3 as I call it. Or you can access it on my website, drscb.com, and you can find it on the Makerspace tab. But this is just a series of questions. The answers are supplied by your community members. This is user-centered evidence, the not library-centered. That said, I will tell you that libraries who have started using this checklist, both in and outside of makerspace situations, have found that just asking the questions, not even talking to the user, starts to shake things up and loosen up that surface design. So when Jimmy just recently said that 39% of the people in his study don't use research when decision making or doing a service model decision or developments, that's what this is for. So let's discuss how you might use it first, and then we'll go into what's inside of it. So the C3 is a series of questions, and you could use it all at once in one ginormous survey if you want. I do not recommend. There's too many moving parts here, and that survey would take somebody an hour or more to go through. I think repeated, brief, targeted surveys using Likert scales would be a really useful way to determine both what is important to people, but then also how well you're doing in supporting it. So Rebecca Teasdale talks about this in her work, about if you ask somebody how well you are supporting some particular goal that is not relevant to their needs, you're not going to get good data. It will be skewed. If you say, so how well are we doing with that 3D printing stuff? And this person has no interest in 3D printing, they'll be like, fine. Like, they don't care. It's not important. So don't ask them how you're doing if they don't care about how you're doing. That's something that you should know about. There's another way to do this, though. You could do this very informally, just talking to people, taking notes, maybe on a different theme or different capability each month or something like that. Or you could turn this into an almost program where you say, is it important for you to be able to share your expertise in the makerspace on a board and give people post-it notes to answer both the question, but also to talk to each other across time and space in a sort of passive programming model. So there are lots of different ways you could use this list of questions, and any of the ways will hopefully be useful for you. Now I'm going to talk briefly, very briefly, about the different capabilities, because I only have a couple of minutes. So the first one is obvious. It's about access. Can you physically get into the space and intellectually understand how to use it? Social cultural rose to its own capability. I'll talk about that in a moment. But these are some of the questions, the many questions I ask in the C3 checklist. I want to highlight one of them. Are there inequities in the use of your space? So if you're looking at your library makerspace and you're only seeing white dudes in your space, you have an access issue. Even if anybody else is welcome in the space and you'll be happy to teach them, it's probably that social cultural access that's the problem. They don't understand what the space is for, why it's valuable to them, and how they could benefit from it, because that's what access is, the ability to benefit from something. So in this place, these kids, you can see the reflections, I hope, in the window on this image. There are about 50 kids waiting outside. They can't go inside that space because they don't have a parental permission form signed. The parents have to come into the library to sign that form, and they don't want to do that. Geographically, it's challenging when you're swinging through this library to pick up your kid after school. Those parents aren't coming in, so no one is in the makerspace. There is no access. But the more challenging access area to work with and to develop and ensure is this capability of understanding yourself and your needs in the context of the space and what it affords you. So this is what social cultural access is. So if you don't know that these maker toys are for you to either use or to make in the space because there's no signage, all it says here in this image is maker toys, you don't know what is available to you. You don't know what can be accomplished in this space. So signage is a big part, and there's quite a few questions in the C3 under this capability about, are you really talking to all of your audiences? And are you doing it in ways that are meaningful for them at the point of their need? Are you requiring them to ask you questions? Because people hate having to ask you questions. The capability of trust is foundational. If you don't trust people to use the soldering iron, then you won't give them a soldering iron. If the users don't trust you to allow them to make what they need to make in the space, they won't come. So it goes both ways. And there's questions on the C3 about how to both understand what your culture of trust is and how to build that culture of trust. Then there's the capability of acting yourself and not just being acted upon. And there's three sub capabilities in here. You have to have some say, but some people, only some, really want to be able to give of their own expertise in these spaces. They want to share their knowledge. And if they're not able to do that, they will not use your makerspace. Other people don't care about this at all. And so this is one of those capabilities where if you ask somebody who doesn't care about this, how you're doing and supporting it, the answer you get is not useful. And then you have to be able to not just swoop in and take over someone's project through control, but offer the help that they need. This person was not empowered in his project because he's standing off on the side as the librarians ensure that his project doesn't fail. And he didn't care about failure. He cared about learning how to use the equipment. So be sure that you're not over helping. You need to be able to choose what your means and ends are. And this goes back to that issue of if you're calling your makerspace a learning lab and someone is not particularly interested in learning, they want to make something or they want to play or they want to hang out with their friends or all of the myriad other reasons someone could want to use a makerspace, you might not support that because as a librarian, you may have, these are the ends and these are the means that we've deemed appropriate. We have to ensure that the users can decide for themselves. For example, I want to do etchings and printmaking. In some libraries, they would say, no, that's not what we're about. We're about 3D printing and STEM. A more responsive library will say, yes, we will support these needs. And clearly you can't support them all. But if you have a certain set of values built in about what your space is for, you might foreclose opportunities. In one library, they wouldn't buy a second vinyl cutter, though that was booked out for weeks and weeks in advance because they said, no one's learning 21st century skills using this printer. But people really wanted to make with it. So they foreclosed the empowerment of those communities by taking that away from them. People need to be able to coexist and connect. They need to share the tools, but connecting is important. And you can't do it if you're facing the wall and you're 15 feet away from anyone else. And in fact, the librarians sometimes will interpose their bodies between two patrons trying to talk to each other because they did not trust that their users would be respectful to one another. So there are lots of ways in which we can ensure that people not only can coexist, but they can connect at the level they want to connect, whether that's just seeing what others are doing or making new friends. And finally, people want to be able to adapt both their environments, moving that electrical around, but also their own dispositions and how comfortable they are in finding the environment. And the C3 offers some questions on how you can ask how you're doing with these various aspects of your maker community support. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this is because when we focus on internal values and internal understandings of what we want to do and don't talk to our users about what's important to them, we can say we're empowering people, but it becomes an empty promise. When we start to pinpoint what exactly we are empowering and how we're doing it, we start to provide compelling evidence to our users, to our funders, to our boards, to each other about what the impact of our Makerspaces services are and can be. With that, I will leave it for the next person. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Shannon, I'm excited to take a closer look at your checklist. That looks awesome. Okay, so
Thank
next
you.
up we have Jennifer Nichols, and her presentation is titled "We Are All Makers: Measuring Self-Efficacy and Engagement in an Academic Library Makerspace."
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I am Jennifer Nichols. I am an associate librarian and director of Catalyst Studios at the University of Arizona, which is in Tucson. I'm lucky enough to be presenting to you from Morro Bay, California today. And I have the ocean roaring behind me. So for those of you who don't live close to the ocean, it's really nice. I encourage you to get there again someday soon. It's such a privilege. I am talking about this research study that I started this year. And for those of you who are working in academic libraries, it might be familiar to you. We have such complicated relationships. Myself, I'll speak for myself only, but you know, I only have a little bit of time to do research. So this project is, I thought might be a little bit further along by the time I presented to you today. I'm really grateful for this forum. The invitation was, you know, wherever you are in your research, sharing what you're working on. So this is a study that I started this summer, and let's see. So I'll tell you where I'm at. I do not have key findings for you. So Catalyst Studios opened in January 2020. As we all know, that didn't go so well. So we were only open for about 7 weeks, and then we closed for 18 months. So since then, we've been growing in our usage every semester to the point where it would be easy to just continue with what we're doing, which is a combination of curricular engagement, using things like Maker Literacies, using some of the frameworks and other presentations that we've heard here today in our curricular engagement. And so we're really thinking about our users as learners in these very formal situations. So some of the research and conversations today around school libraries have been really interesting to me. Assessment of learning in the classroom, matching skills and evidence-based practices. But then we also have this very robust community of extracurricular users. So we find that students may find us because they come in for a class, but you are not required to be doing classroom work to be in our space. And so the number of users has grown, as you might expect, over time as they've been coming in. Now, some of our students who work for us, in fact, came in person. They're one of the first in-person classes to come in as a freshman and are now starting to graduate. So we're getting this kind of cumulative effect of students coming in for all different reasons across the educational experience. So we have a large makerspace, but we also have these tangential studios as well. I won't get into that so much. The purpose of the study that we developed was to find out, to explore what influences students to use our spaces and the impact such use has on their attitudes towards making and confidence in their own skills. So as I said before, we have all different kinds of users using our spaces, but we wanted to know, is learning happening really? What's making them come back? Not just I have to come in for a class, and then what is that effect on them? So here were our research questions. Who is using the studios? So last year, in the time frame that we chose our participants, we had a sign-in station where you had to enter your net ID by hand. So we know that the students who signed in, we have a certain participant pool of 2,307, but we have a very large threshold. So based on some of the research that Dr. Mello has done, and full disclosure, Dr. Mello was a part of our prototype space. She did her PhD at the University of Arizona, and she and I are close collaborators. But her research is reflected in a lot of what we have in Catalyst Studios. So we had this very large threshold to try to encourage people to come across that last year. And so a lot of people would walk right past that sign-in studio. So this participant pool of 2,307 students were those who stopped in at the registration station and signed in, and we were able to pull their demographic data based on those sign-ins. We had more than that come into the space for classes. We had more than that come into the space for tours. Also, we didn't include staff and faculty and community users in this number. Going back to the research questions, we wanted to understand the relationship between the students who are using the space and the demographics, and what level of involvement. So what we ask them things like what they do when they're in the space. And the rest of the questions are there, sorry. So from those initial survey participants, this was interesting to us, I think. But not, it doesn't say much, it just is just showing us how many students were coming into the space, but multiple visits, as you can see. So we weren't able to break down by class how many students came in multiple times, but I have a different set of data that's really tracking now because of our new sign-in station. How many times people are coming in and what equipment they're using. I don't really have time to get into that, but we did implement a new sign-in system that is allowing us to track usage much more accurately. This was interesting to us that we have 55% female users. This data is, we're pulling from the university data. So this is self-reported data in the university systems. So you'll see that they did not include non-binary students in the central data set. The race and ethnicity of users wasn't that surprising. We're a Hispanic serving institution. We do a lot of work with our cultural centers, encouraging them to come into our spaces. We also go do outreach to all of our cultural centers as well. And so here's the survey. So it was very, very simple. But what we did for those 2,300 students is we generated a unique link and sent that to them. So we were able to pull their demographic data, and then when they replied to the survey, we could anonymously match that, de-identified their answers. And then the last question we asked them was if they would participate in a 20-minute interview with me. And that was really the meat of what we're trying to get at, is having this other opportunity to ask them more questions. And we took this approach thinking people don't like to fill out surveys. We get very large incomplete rates if we ask them too many questions. So this is the approach we took. 76 survey responses, or 71 is about 3%. So it's acceptable, but I wasn't very happy with it. This is kind of interesting. I think if you look over to the far right, the virtual reality headset. So that was all female activity. The activity by gender was all female, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then in the interviews, what I did is I asked them a series of questions on the Likert scale, 1 to 5. And these were the questions that we asked them. So every interview, I did 6 interviews so far, included this first portion before we did a series of open-ended questions. So I wanted to understand their experience in the space and with the service. Notably, in this time frame, every student had been given $50 of credit every semester for that time frame of fall 23 to spring 24. And we changed that in the fall. So by the time I was interviewing people, I had reduced that to you get a one-time $50 credit. So everyone was reset in the fall of 24. So a lot of people in the interview talked about the influence of that on their making. Impact of engagement and catalyst on student skills and self-efficacy. So I listed all of these things and they talked about their ability. And this, I'm interested to code this data because really it depends on what the person was doing in this space. So some people come in as a group, they bring all their engineering group projects there, and so they're answering questions differently. Other people are very self-motivated, working on their own individual projects, teaching themselves new skills. They're very independent, and so the results of their questions were variable. Sense of belonging and peer learning. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity here for deeper inquiry. This has been really interesting and positive hearing what people are saying about this. And then we had an open-ended conversation. I'm getting better at the open-ended portion of this, wanting to be able to draw out students and have them answer me and tell me more. So after 6 interviews, felt like this isn't a big enough data set for what we're trying to accomplish. So we decided that we need more responses. So we've gone back for round 2 of IRB, which those of you who have to do that, it's not that fun. But really, we've decided to take all of the Likert questions and add them to the survey. And then we've asked to be able to put notice of the survey out far and wide to anyone who's used Catalyst, so they won't be matched to their demographics, and the survey participants will self-identify those demographics on their own. So we're hoping that this will yield a larger number of surveys and therefore a larger number of interviews. So that's why I don't have any key findings for you, but that's where we are in the research so far, and thank you for listening.
Jen, and thanks to all of our presenters. So we just have a few minutes. If anybody wants to ask a question, feel free to throw it into the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask away. I might piggyback off of a comment here. I love the credit idea. Jen, can you tell us a little more about that, how that works?
Yeah, so we have a pretty elementary pricing system where we just charge people for the supplies without any markup, but I really wanted the space to be free. I'm a big proponent of you always pay students and you try to make things as free as possible. And so I kept asking my dean, like, how do we get a donor to support Catalyst being free for everyone? And finally he said, like, how much did you make last year on supplies? And it was, negligible, a couple $1,000s. And he's like, let's just try it. And try to figure out an average of what people are spending. So we started off with $50 a semester. And we only had like 5 people who used all $50, right? So no big deal. And every year we started to be like, if all 40,000 students use this, it would not be sustainable, but they're not using it. But as we've grown kind of exponentially, last summer, I started to do the math and realized like it's not going to be sustainable. So in the fall, I said, let's reset it to 50 to define our values, which are we want people to feel like they can try things and get over that hump of intimidation and any cost barriers. And so you're not going to try 3D printing if it's going to cost you $20 to try to print some figurine from your favorite anime. But you will do it if it's free, and then you're like, okay, I understand what I'm doing here. I'm going to try embroidery and I'm not afraid to fail. So we did that. We've gotten just a little bit of feedback for people who really it makes a big difference. And so we're trying to figure out what the most equitable way is to offer more credit. But last semester, we gave away almost $9,000 worth of supplies. So, but that's not a direct correlation because we wouldn't have collected $9,000. People would not have paid $9,000 for those things. So I don't like to put it in those terms exactly, but there was a lot of money, I'll just say. So we're playing around with it, but right now, yes, everyone gets $50 of credit, and if they go from undergrad to graduate, we'll reset it for them one more time.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we are at time. If anybody has one last final question, please ask away.
No question, just a comment from Jimmy. I really appreciated to present with you both. It was really fun. Hi to Dr. Ko, Kyungwon Ko, and Emily. It feels like graduate school all over again. I've back in the day, I took the first Makerspace class ever offered for Champaign, and like look at it now. It's expanded so much.
Onward and upward. I love it. Well, good news. The closing session is going to be an opportunity for all of us to talk a little bit more. So we're going to try to pull some takeaways from all of the sessions today, and then also have a little more room for discussion because I feel like we were just boom, boom, boom through all of these lightning talks, which were incredible. So please take a quick break and then join us in the closing session. And thanks again, everybody. We'll see you there.